Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So, what I'm gonna do today, I will talk about flows. Right? It's just a general, casual um, discussion about the flows because I've been using flows for a while. Right? For a while means for quite a long time, as you know. But that being said, right? I've seen a lot of flows that's been built and a lot of flows that's been built in not in a good way, right? So over the course of time, I've seen that some people write flows that are super flexible and scalable, and I've seen at the same time people who write flows which are shy. I mean, that's the only way I could express it. Now, when you think about writing a flow, right? First of all, if you're not sure about the flows, if you're new to Salesforce, then flows are, it's a drag and drop low code tool which is used for automation, right? Automation could be if you wanted to automate a process. Let's say you want, um, say for instance, you have an account object. If something changes in account, you want certain things to happen. So you can do that using flows, right? Now, the few things I pay attention to when I write flows or when I do code review. Okay, because these things are very important to me. First of all, you need to understand the kind of flows you need to use, right? When obviously, and the problem you're trying to solve. Okay, so that matters. Just because you can do certain things using flows doesn't mean that you should be using it, right? What I meant by that is, let's say you have a requirement, yeah? You have an object, say account object, and let's say you have an integration with the third-party system whose responsibility lies in um, transferring account information that's been created there to the Salesforce. Let's say you have an accounting system and you have a Salesforce, right? And both accounting systems and Salesforce, they talk to each other using an API, right? Now, whenever an account, and let's say an accounting system is a source of truth for accounts. Now, whenever a new account is created, there's a requirement that that account information needs to be transferred to the Salesforce. Okay, and which is great. So you have an integration in place. So and when that happens, right, in account in Salesforce, say Salesforce needs to create a task, right, and tasks based on different kinds of account. Just a simple scenario. I do understand that it may not make some much sense from a business process, but just assume, right, this is the case, right? Whenever an account gets inserted, so based on the type of account, a different kinds of tasks will be created, which is governed by a record type in the task. Okay. Now, you would assume that, okay, we can do that using Apex, right, using a trigger, or you can use a record trigger flows, right? Pretty simple. Now, if I go to record trigger flows, if I go here, right? Oh yeah, it's taking its own sweet time. Interesting. So you have record trigger flow. You can choose this one and you can create it. Now, now you have few options here, right? So if you start with the flow, right, you will see that here you need to obviously specify a trigger. So on which object this will be fired, right? Say in this case account and record trigger. So when do you want it? Do you want the record is when the record is created, or when the record is updated, or when the record is deleted, right? You have different options. So let's say you only want this to be done on the creator option. So you just choose this. But if you want this to be done when the record is updated, right? And like if you consider from an Apex perspective, you have an update trigger, right? So, before update or after update. So, but in this case, we're not talking about that scenario. We're just only talking about an insert process. Okay. So a record is created. Now, so you have an option here. Um, so if so once you and then you have a certain conditions you can specify, right? Like you should only fire this stuff when certain fields are this, right? So, for instance, active equals to true, right? Yeah. So you only want to fire when this process has active state equal to true. And this one, you have two options, right? Optimize the flow for fast field update or action related records, right? So in the fast field updates, it says update fields on the record that triggers the flow to run. So this high performance flow runs before the record is saved uh, to the database. So if you wanted to do a before insert operation, then you choose this process, okay? And if you wanted to do an after insert operation, then you go for this, okay? So let's say you want to do certain kind of validation before your account information even hit the database in Salesforce, then you go for this option. But if you want the action to be performed only after the data is inserted, then you go for this one, right? And if you wanted to run in an asynchronous way, you can do that as well. So you need to pay attention to the small, a little bit nitty-gritty stuff, right? You might think it's trivial, but it can have a lot of impact in your process down the chain. Okay, so let's say I choose this. Okay, now you can also add a scheduled path. Now you must be thinking, why do I need to add a scheduled path? Okay, so think about a scenario. I'm going to explain it from a use case, right? What I built, and so that makes it clear. So the entire discussion around this just to make sure that you write better flows, right? That's the whole point. So it can get a bit longer. So if you think you can't sit longer, you can pause the video and go and grab a cup of coffee, right, and then watch it, right? So add scheduled path. Why do we need this one, right? So this one is useful. Let's say if you have a record trigger flow, but you wanted to schedule an API action. Okay, let's say in this process, right, you wanted to invoke an API to retrieve some stuff, and let's say you decide to use an external service. Okay, and if you want to use an external service, if you wanted to use an API, you can't use a non-scheduled process. It has to be scheduled because if you do run ASAP, it will not work. So that's one of the reasons why that's one use case. Okay, if you wanted to run an external service process within a record trigger flow, then you need to schedule it. Okay, right? Now you can also open the Flow Trigger Explorer for an account. So that is something, you can do that just to see, what's going on here. And right. And this is like a flow trigger, which to give you, uh, to see how many flows you have for the object. And one thing I just wanted to mention that please do not create too many flows for, for the object, right? It should be like, for instance, I would say go with the number three numbers, right? You can create for before, after, and other stuff. Three will be ideal, but again, based on your requirement and business problem you're trying to solve, right? Because I've seen some object have like 10 flows, and before insert is being replicated like in like four flows, which doesn't make any sense to me in whatsoever. That's a lazy way of doing stuff. That's not really a good solution in my opinion, right? And run immediately. You can do the stuff here, and you can add all the stuff. You can update the record triggering record, which is great. Um, so and then you can use the invocable apex, you can use the subflow, and you can use the stuff. Now, one thing I just wanted to want to let you guys know, right? You should always follow the separation of concern principle. What that means is that your flow should only do one and only one thing, right? If it's about account, if it's about updating an account, it should be done in this flow. But if it's about updating an opportunity, updating a task, it should be split into subflow, right? Because then you're violating a solid principle if you're not doing that. And that's how you build a modular architecture, right? Now, one thing I just wanted to be careful, you should also be careful about the number of subflows you should be building, right? You shouldn't be going crazy about number of subflows. Oh, all right, I wanted to do subflow for this, subflow for this. It can have a performance impact, right? If you're trying to do a lot of flows. So, um, but at the same time, it's also important to make sure that you should not contaminate your flow with putting every logic in a single flow. I've seen a lot of flow, and those flows are shite. And people will take pride. Oh, look at my flow; it's so super complicated. That's a shite flow. I mean, I will not let that code get into production. If I see those kind of flows, it straight away get rejected the code review because how do you expect someone to debug that flow? Or how do you expect someone to troubleshoot that flow or add functionality to the flow? It's not a great thing to make something complicated. The art of building something is to make it simple, scalable, modular, so that it's easily maintainable. That's the key. Keep it simple principle, right? So the key things I look for when I code review a flow or when I build a flow, first of all, I'll see whether I have a window of opportunity where I can split the flow into subflows, right? If I wanted to create a task, right, then I will not be putting a task creation, excuse me, using create record. This is a very bad practice. Okay, I would rather split that task creation in the subflow, and I'll attach the subflow here because then all kind of process will happen there, right? And if I have to fix something, right, I can go and fix in that flow. And imagine what happens if you have a different requirement uh, where you need to create a task, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to duplicate the code there? No, right? Because the code duplication is the worst. I mean, code duplication or the flow duplication, the component duplication, or whichever terms you wanted to consider. So instead, if you have a subflow, you're going to reuse it there, right? Which is pretty simple. And one mistake I often see, right, that people don't include error nodes. So let's say you have a create record, so create, right? And record, I'll say count. I just see this, right? Now, I see something like this, which is great, but what happens if your create process fails? How are you going to notify the user, right? Or do you want it to do a retry option, or what exactly going to do, right? Because for me, a flow without error handling is not a great flow. Okay, so obviously you need to add a default path, right? And maybe if you have a logger in place, just hook up to logger, right? That's the thing. All right, now this is great. Now there are scenarios where flows may not be a great choice, especially when you're dealing with a large data volume. What happens if you have, let's say, a million records transaction a day? Are you going to use the flows? It's not a great option to use flow. I would rather prefer to choose the Apex for that, right? Because I do understand that the Salesforce has been saying, okay, this is a local tool. It will does a lot of things, which is great. It does a lot of things, right? And it's fantastic. But you need to consider the business context as well, right? Whether it's going to work for today, whether it's going to work for tomorrow, because I always believe, I'm a big believer that your technology solution should not be built keeping today into consideration. It should be built keeping tomorrow into consideration as well. Okay, that's how you build a scalable solution, right? Now, uh, now that's great, right? Now, okay, so what I'm as I mentioned that if you have a large data volume problem, then flow may not be a great solution. And also, if you think that your flows is getting too big, then put that into a subflow, right? Different process doing different things, right? And that's how you create the modular architecture. And also, it will make a way for your scalability as well. That's great. Okay, now let's go back, right? Now there are different kinds of flows. I just wanted to talk about. We've seen the record trigger flow, right, which is pretty simple. Now, now you have, and I'm going to talk about one the screen flows. Okay. Now, screen flows. Why do we use screen flows, right? And what challenges you're going to face with the screen flow? Let's look at the screen flows. Screen flows are the flows where you actually expect a user input. Okay. It could be filling an insurance form, or it could be filling a customer feedback form. You can create a user screen flow with a pretty good looking interface. And but if for whatever reason, right, let's say you can add a screen, and in the screen I will say I wanted to add a script, to add this. Okay, we add a few things here and there, right? And I'll just put test. I don't have any screen here, but okay, I'll just put test one. Now, I'm deliberately doing this just to tell you some important things, okay? I have a screen flow, right? And if you wanted to, test it, you just probably, the way you test it, right? You probably, what you're going to do is that, right? You will save it and you debug it. That's the best way. And you can hook up the screen flow to different processes, different um, part of the Salesforce, right? So that if user want, you can hook up this to a button. So maybe, in account screen, you can do that. So, certain process you have in place, when the user click on the button, it will run this flow and do whatever it's supposed to do, right? So that kind of things is highly possible using the screen flow. Screen flows are very good. Okay, now if you look at the ScreenFlow components, you have a lot of options here, right? Phone stack, and also you have custom. Now, custom is when if you think that an existing screen component is not good enough, and you wanted to extend that, you can build an LWC component, and these are the LWC component, and you can build an LWC component and drag and drop to it, right? And so that's one thing you can do, right? You can make your user interface pretty good looking, uh, and a lot of controls you have in place. Okay, now I mentioned one thing, right, about the naming this one as test and test tree. Now the naming convention is really important, right? This is a shite naming convention. Excuse me. You cannot put test one, test two, test three. You wanted to make sure that you enter a right meaningful name. In convention, maybe you have a camel case in place, a Pascal case, whatever standard you follow, please make sure you stick to that, right? Consistency is the key. You shouldn't be a rogue floor developer who wants to do things in different way. It's great to do things in a different way, but you got to stick to the standards what we have in place, right? It's good to be innovative in your solution. That's great. That should be encouraged. But but I believe that there should be a certain coding or naming convention in place, which should be strictly followed, right? So that's one of the reasons why I said this is a very wrong API name, because test one, test three, it doesn't make any sense, right? It's a lazy way of doing things. So that's the reason why I put that, so that I can explain to you. Like if I look at it, I would say, why did this person put test three, right? It makes no sense, because this is about an address. So it should be something about address, component, whichever, uh, if you have, camel case or Pascal case, whatever. So you can do something like that, right? Just to make it more meaningful. And you can also include, like I said, the subflows to it. The same logic which I explained before. It can be, you can build a base form, and you can use the base form, and you can hook up the other stuff, right? You can do a lot of things. It's really powerful, in my opinion. Yeah. And you can also create a template, like a base template, and you can use that as a part of your um, uh, the base inheritance, right? What I mean by that is that let me show you something, right? If I save it as, I just want to delete it, dummy flow, or let's say it's called as the base flow, right? Let's say I want these flows to be used as a base flow, so that any new flow which I wanted to create, I should be keeping this as a base. Okay. Uh, and also please make sure that you enter proper description. This is a base flow, because it's important that you document your stuff, right? And so show advanced. Okay, now you come here. How to run this flow? You can run in the system context. You can run in with sharing. You can run without sharing, right? So a lot of things with sharing, without sharing. I hope you know this concept, right? When the sharing concept will be applied, And so if you don't want to do that, you can always run in the sharing system context. Okay, you have an option there, right? And the type, what is it? Is it screen flow? Um, so you can, obviously we are doing a screen flow, right? So you don't have to worry about it. Now here is the magic. I don't want this to be saved as flow. I want it to save it as a template. Okay. Now I'll do that, and I'll do save. Okay, and I'll activate it. Right. Okay. Now I've done that. I'll refresh it. Noise. Okay. Now let's create a flow here. Um, Template. Um, I don't know where did I kept it. Screen flow. See the base flow which I've created? I go here and create it. See, I got all the necessary stuff I want, right? I've done this for a complex flow where I wanted to, because I do understand that Salesforce don't have concept of inheritance when it comes to flow. Um, but that's great, but that's not a problem here, right? You can use the template as a workaround, and I've used that constantly for few stuff I built, complex stuff. You can use the screen flow, you can build on top of it, right? And you can do a lot of design pattern stuff here, right? Flows is really good for that. Okay, so that's great. So I hope that's clear and very simple, right? And as usual, the error handling logic, everything works here as well, the one which I explained. And one more thing I just wanted to say that you can also drive a lot of things using metadata as well, right? Custom metadata is a place where you can make your flow configurable. Like, you can add the different params. You can build a lot of fancy stuff using existing tech, what we have. Okay, and now I'm going to talk about one very important flow, which is very dear to me. And I've been working on this for the past few months. That's the platform event trigger flow, right? Now, platform event trigger flow, it's like a pub sub model, right? So you have um, a publisher and you have a subscriber. So obviously, for this to work, you need to have a platform event in place, right? So you create it. So now, if you're not sure how to do a platform event, so you go to your org, and this is a gecko icon. I click on setup, it takes you to setup here. Now you look for platform event. Excuse me. Got this bloody cough again, but apologies for that. Coughing. All right, you create a platform event here. Let's take your time. Hmm. All right, and you can create a platform event like we have one in place, right? Account log. Yeah. So I've created this, I think, a long time ago. So I've added this platform event. So now the only difference between the platform event and a custom object, right? You can see that I mean, there's a difference, but I'm saying from a object naming convention, it will be underscore underscore e, whereas in the custom it will be c, right? So, and then you can create your new fields, and then you publish the information to this field. So that's the broadcasting part, right? You publish it using this information. When you publish it, data get inserted into the platform event object in the form of events, and that events needs to be subscribed. You can obviously subscribe using external system, right, which supports the commit DE interface. Like could be a Java system, could be a .NET system, could be a JavaScript based system, right? It could be any client system which can support Comet D. It can subscribe to this platform. Right? But that being said, you can also do that using flows, right? So flows, if I create a, like for instance, we have a subscription flow here. So you can see the list of subscribers here, right? So this flow is subscribed to it. Now, if I wanted to subscribe, let's say, just to show you an example, I want to subscribe to this flow. Um, I'll just look for this. You just go to, hang on a second. All right, let me look for this logger flow. Okay, so I'll launch it. and then you see that the object here. So you're looking for the platform event, okay? So because it is a platform event based, so it will expect the platform event object. So now you're subscribing to it, and once you receive an information, you do whatever you want to do here, right? So that's how it works from a platform event perspective. It's a powerful functionality, but one thing I just wanted to mention there, right? You just need to be careful about the large data volume. It's not really very suitable for a very large data volume. I built this flow right for one of my projects, but then I realized I should have done this using a trigger. So I mean, it's okay if you're dealing with a low volume, right? It works very well. But if you're dealing with a massive data, right, I prefer to use this in a form of a trigger. So in a trigger, you have better handle, like after insert trigger on a platform event. So once the data is inserted, you can make sure that you write a trigger, and then you can write a different design pattern in Apex, maybe a factory pattern or maybe a facade pattern to do different things, right? So I'm pretty big on design patterns. So if you really like to know more about design pattern, right? My book will be released by July. So I'm releasing a book on Apex to how to build a scalable application using a design pattern, right? I talked about different patterns. Like I guess I mentioned about the book in the past, right? The different topics I wanted to cover, and I'm pretty sure you will get a lot of value out of it. All right, sorry, I digress. So you can do this something like that, right? If you're not really concerned about the large data volume, you can use the flows to subscribe to it. If this is one of the requirements you have, right? If you wanted to handle two different PubSub process inside the same Salesforce org, you can follow this approach. Or you can also use the change data capture, right? That's another thing. But the only reason you wanted to use the platform when if you wanted to customize your payload, then you can use the platform event, right? Now, there's also opportunity you have in place, right? Like I said, that you should be focusing on single responsibility principle, right? That means to say that you should not be writing a business logic here. You should use this subscriber as a container, right? And inside the container, you can use subflows to do your stuff, right? Now, the thing to note, one thing to know, right? And I'm telling you, that you cannot use subflows inside a platform event trigger flows. Okay, I mentioned that you can use subflows, right? But there is a way you can use it. So the way you can use it, I've done it here. You write an Apex class, right? You write an invocable Apex and use that invocable Apex through call your subflows. Okay, you can do that if you want a modular architecture. There's something that I've done in the past, right? Obviously, you cannot use subflows directly inside the platform event triggered um, flows. Just remember that, right? Because if you look at it, there's no option here. Yeah. So the only way you can do it using invocable Apex um, to do your flows. Now, since we're talking about invocable Apex, I just wanted to mention if you have a complex business requirement that you think can't be done properly with the flows, I would encourage you to add an invocable Apex, move the logic to Apex. Because, like I said, it's all forms a part of the separation of design principle, right? You need to know, if you're a developer or an architect, you will know, right? Having a modular structure in place, it's gonna make your system more scalable, right? Because then you can uh, uh, distribute the responsibility to different aspects of the system rather than one system doing everything at a time, right? So that's something you need to pay attention to. And this is something I've learned from my previous programming experience in C Sharp. When I was a C Sharp programmer, I used to use a lot of design pattern, and it taught me so many things, right? Because I'm not a functional consultant. I'm a technical architect. I do functional stuff, but my skill set is code. I can code any day, anywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a Salesforce or React.js or PyTorch. I can code. That's my bread and butter. So if you're gonna write it right, just make sure you put it in invocable apex. And now the same principle applies. Error handling. So like you see, this invocable apex has an error handling. So it's creating an error record. Now you can say, what happens if this thing goes fails, right? Yeah, you can work around with that, right? So that's one flow, right? This is platform one. Let's look at an interesting flow. which you will be using more often. That is the auto launch flow. Okay. Now I've been talking about subflows, right? Now you must be wondering which flow should I be using to create a subflow. So for that, you'll be using auto launch flow, right? To use the subflow. Now subflows can have an input value, can have an output value. You just want to make sure that you get it right, right? So um, and there are certain processes. Maybe your requirement is too complex. You may think that creating an input element here is not sufficient. So what you can do, you can use the Apex uh, defined input, right? You can go to your VS Code and write an input, write a class, Apex defined class, invocable, and so that you can pass them as an input. So if you go here, you have an option here called variable data type. If you go here, you have something called Apex defined. And if you go here, these are the Apex defined, right? So you can you can build your own and you can choose, right? So that's one thing you just need to keep into consideration as well. Okay, so auto launch flows, like I said, if you wanted to build a subflow, right, you use the auto launch flows, which is pretty interesting. Schedule trigger flow. This is like your schedule process, right? If you use Apex, you know schedule flow, right? If you wanted to run a flow once, or say for instance as a part of a data migration process, you can do this, right? Or if you wanted to run every day, you can do that. Or if you wanted to run weekly, you can do that at specific time. Let's say I wanted to run a flow at 5 in the morning, right? Every single day. You can use the schedule trigger flow, right? It does pretty well. Yeah. So now I'm going to talk about the record trigger orchestration. If you wanted to perform in a multi-step, multi-user process, you can use the record trigger orchestration. I'll talk about this one of the other episode. Right now, you must be thinking, okay, that's all great. Now, can you tell me some use case for the flows, right? Like the one use case I said, right? You have an account integration with an external system, right? You can, and if the Salesforce is not the source, sorry, if the salesforce is not the source of truth, and if the counter system is the source of truth, and you're integrating your Salesforce with an API, you can use a flow there. I mean, you can also use a trigger. Now, the usage of flow and Apex can be a biased usage, right? If you have a team of developers who are extremely focused on code, they will call flow as a shit. No offense. I can tell you, they will think the flow is useless, right? Drag and drop component, right? They will think, oh, I can control a lot of things using flow. Why should I bother, right? And if you're a team of functional consultants, again, the cognitive bias will come into play. They say, oh, code is too complicated. Let's do everything in the flow, which is also a problem, right? The both approaches has its own problem, right? There are certain things which you don't have to use using code, because code involves a lot of maintenance, right? If you can use flows for simple things, right? Certain things based on the business requirement. And if you think flow works well, you should stick to flow, right? But if you think that certain things which cannot be done with the flow, you shouldn't be trying to over engineer a flow to do that. It should be, distributed to be done in an Apex or in an LWC if you wanted to make your screen component looks and to add different logic, right? So it should be case by case, right? And you need to understand when you need to use the flow or when you need to use the Apex, right? Uh, so that metrics you just need to identify based on the business problem you're trying to solve. Yeah. Um, and and another thing I wanted to mention that um, flows, it comes with the practice, right? And obviously, if you have gone in using, if you have selected an approach um, which involves usage of flows, right? And let's say you are in the middle of a project and you think the flows not going to work very well, maybe not because of the large data volume, then you can explore the Apex side. I'm not saying to throw away your entire flow what you built. You can obviously, use invocable Apex to see if you can work work that out, right? Just don't try to over-engineer it. There's no harm in telling your stakeholders, hey, this is not really going to work. I do get it, right? Some people are a bit hesitant. They think that it's going to affect the performance. You know what really going to affect your performance? If you deliver a solution which breaks in production after a certain amount of time. That's really going to affect your performance because they're going to blame you. Are you the architect, right? Who designed that XYZ system, right? So that's how it, that's how it works. I've seen that. The blame game is not really a good option, right? Because obviously we're trying to build a solution for a customer, and they're paying for that, right? And we just wanted to ensure that you build in the right solution. I take building any of the stuff is like a craft. You start from scratch, or like a builder, or like a painter, right? Not everyone can be a Picasso, right, or Michelangelo. You got to you got to bring your passion, you got to bring your creativity, you got to bring problem solving skills, right? That's the way I look at it. Or not everyone can be like a Mozart or Beethoven to create that beautiful harmonious symphony, right? So, and the reason why those people existed because they were passionate about their craft, right? If you're passionate about building things, you will get this stuff right. So that's one of the things, and you always need to make sure that, right, you document your process. It's important to document your process. It's important to document your flows, because if someone else wanted to look at it, they can always go through the documentation, right? You might get hit by a bus, then what, right? You may not be able to work, and then, you know, so the person needs to figure out, right, what the heck you built. Obviously, flows are pretty easy if you can look at it, but having a documentation, right, always helps the team, right? I'm not saying that you need to document every single tiny, minuscule detail, but at least an overview architecture, that will be a good starting point, right? So I hope this seems a pretty good discussion, in my opinion. I tried to cover what I wanted to cover, and one more use case of the flow, if you wanted to see that, if you wanted to use your flow, say in Experience Builder, a community page, you can do that as well, right? You can build a nice looking interface where a customer can interact, fill a form. Let's say you're building something for an insurance company, they want the user input, you can do that, and the customer can submit it. And in behind the scene, you can update the right Salesforce objects, and then you can generate an invoice and do whatever you want to do with it, right? So that's one of the flow use case, right? Um, so yeah, that's something I just wanted to talk. So, like I said, it's a casual flow conversation, but if you enjoyed it, I'm glad. So, that being said, I hope you guys have an amazing Saturday. Adios.